I had an interesting communication this week from my pals Jamie and Liz at followtheboat.com, which is a site well worth looking at, by the way. And Jamie had posted something about his own boat, which is a ketch with what nowadays is called a cutter four-triangle. He had a fair amount of correspondence about this, and there was a certain amount of controversy about what was a cutter and what wasn't. And he thought it'd be interesting to get my take on it. Well, thanks, Jamie. And here it is. I'm a man who knows a bit about cutters because not only do I have a modern cutter now, a Mason 44, I've done 40 years with Gaff cutters, which actually are the real cutters. They're quite different from the modern cutter. And the nature of the cutter rig in a gaffer is totally at odds to the modern boat. So here's how it is with a gaffer. The forestay runs all the way from the hounds of the rig to the stem head on a gaffer, and it holds the mast up. That's its main job. It sets a staysail as well, but its main job is to hold the mast up. The hounds on a gaffer are very much higher than they are on a modern Bermudan boat, and therefore you can get a much bigger staysail in there, and the sail is much more important. Everything that's set outward of the forestay is basically window dressing. You've got a bowsprit sticking out there, which is a marvellous thing, and from the bowsprit you can set jibs, you can set a flying jib, you can set a jib topsail, and they really power the boat up. But they are extras, really. You can set a topsail on the topmast, and that's above the hounds, and that's out of the way as well. If everything carries away, that forestay will hold the mast that's below it into the boat. And therefore it's a completely different thing from the forestay on a modern cutter. Just a few more words about gaff cutters, because I've, as I say, a lot of experience of them. You've got to have a lot of wind before the boat will sail with staysail and mainsail and no jibs. You can't just take the jib in when it's blowing and think the boat's going to be all right, because it's not. The balance absolutely goes to pieces and the boat slows down. It lies like a log in the water, especially going to windward. You've got to have something set on the bowsprit and of course reef the main to taste. But without something set on the bowsprit, she'll be very slow indeed. Now, the Bermudan cutter is a completely different animal, because if you look at this picture of my boat, you'll see that the mast is really being held up by the topmast forestay. She's a masthead rigged boat, and it's not a topmast forestay at all. That is the main forestay. The old gaffer, she had a bit of a topmast forestay up there that was a bit of an extra. But my forestay, the outer one, is really doing the job. There's a little forestay inside it on which I can set a staysail. And that's very, very useful. And that's what makes the rig what it is, really. It's got so many handy functions, that. But the powerhouse is the outer forestay and the genoa. Now, some boats, some modern cutters, set a very high cut Yankee. Mine's fairly high, but it's not as high as some. And if you've got a very high cut Yankee, you might set a deep, large staysail inside it, and then you've got something approaching a true cutter. But most of us have big semi-genoas with the clew fairly well up off the deck. You don't want a deck scraper, but fairly well up there, and a nice little staysail set inside it. Going to windward, my staysail doesn't really do very much at all. It's an extra. It almost gets in the way, actually. But as soon as you're reaching, if you set it carefully, it will give you a tiny little bit extra. But where it really comes into its own is when it's seriously windy. Because once it's blowing force 6, what sort of 28 knots or so, or 25 even, I don't really want the genoa anymore. I've probably got 4 or 5 rolls in it and it's not setting very well, so I just get rid of it. And then I've got a whole staysail to set, which is perfectly shaped and is doing its job. I've got a couple of reefs in the main by then, and the boat's perfectly balanced. And that's when it pays off. The cutter rig in heavy weather in a modern boat is absolutely brilliant. And look at this. I can heave to as well, most wonderfully, with the staysail and the main. Very difficult heaving to in a modern sloop, because you've got to reef the genoa down and it doesn't set properly and it gets in the way, and the sheets get in the way of the outer rigging for the mast, the cap shrouds. It's a messy business. But with a staysail, it's absolutely perfect. So you see, the modern cutter's got an awful lot going for her. Jamie's spelt some of it out on his site, but quite honestly, it's as simple as that really to me. It gives me flexibility, and I love to have flexibility in a rig. So that's the modern cutter. As for the old one, I just love them. They're great. But I'm getting on a bit, and it's a young man's game. So for me, it's the modern Bermudan cutter.